A pregnant woman stands alone in a hall where her name is spoken only as warning. Her family has turned away. Nobles whisper, "No man will claim her child." Then the vampire king, ancient, immortal, untouchable, bends close to her ear and speaks a single command that will shatter kingdoms. "Pretend that baby is mine." In that instant, the disgraced becomes divine. The bastard becomes heir. And the lie that should destroy them both becomes their only salvation. Eloan could not remember exactly when the candles began to multiply. Maybe it was when the second glass of spiced wine appeared in her hand, or when the musicians began playing a melody that felt older than memory, and the hall started to sway as if the very walls were breathing. She blinked slowly, trying to anchor herself to something solid, a pillar, a face, the edge of a table, but everything seemed softened, warmed, impossibly distant. "More wine, cousin." The voice came from her left. Eloan turned her head, the movement taking far longer than it should have, and found Cassandra Ashford's carefully painted smile. The expression was too sweet, too deliberate. "I think I've had enough," Eloan murmured, her tongue feeling thick and strange in her mouth. "Nonsense. It's a harvest masquerade." Cassandra filled Eloan's goblet again, pressing it toward her with insistent fingers. "You're supposed to drink deeply tonight. The wine is blessed. It will bring you clarity." Eloan accepted the goblet without question. Her body felt so warm, almost feverish. Perhaps more wine would help settle whatever was rising in her chest. Or perhaps it would make everything worse. She no longer knew. "Thank you for being here with me today, my wonderful family. Before we dive into today's tale of forbidden love, ancient secrets, and a lie that could shatter kingdoms, I need you to do something for me. If you're ready to lose yourself in a story about a disgraced noblewoman and the vampire king who whispers the most dangerous words she's ever heard, hit that subscribe button right now. And please, drop a comment telling me where you're watching from, because tomorrow I'll be bringing you another story just as captivating as this one, and you absolutely don't want to miss it. Trust me, this journey we're about to take together, it's going to be unforgettable. Now, let's begin with a night neither of them will remember and a child that will change everything. The annual harvest masquerade had never been a modest affair. It was the night when noble houses gathered under the new moon to honor old alliances, negotiate new ones, and drink ritual wine infused with herbs said to thin the veil between fate and desire. The tradition was ancient. No one questioned it. No one doubted its necessity. But something was deeply, terribly wrong. Eloan pressed a hand to her temple, feeling moisture bead along her hairline. The laughter of the nobles around her seemed to echo inside her skull, distorted, simultaneously too loud and impossibly far away. The masked faces blurred together. She couldn't tell who was watching her and who had already looked away. "I need air," she whispered, more to herself than anyone else. She rose unsteadily, gripping the edge of the table to keep from swaying. Cassandra watched with that same unsettling smile, but said nothing. Across the hall, Lisette Ashford dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief, playing the concerned cousin while her gaze remained cold and calculating. Eloan didn't care. She just needed to leave. Each step felt heavier than the last. Each breath is harder to control. She crossed the hall slowly, clutching the skirt of her gown, trying desperately not to draw attention. The music swelled and fell in nauseating waves. The candlelight seemed to pulse with her heartbeat. That was when she collided with someone. The impact sent them both staggering. He caught her arm just as she grabbed his. Both trying to stay upright. Both failed. "Careful." His voice came out low, rougher than he likely intended. Eloan lifted her eyes, and the air left her lungs entirely. The man before her was tall, inhumanly so. His shoulders were broad beneath a dark cloak that seemed to drink in the candlelight rather than reflect it. His face was all sharp angles and pale skin, framed by silver-white hair that fell past his shoulders. But it was his eyes that stopped her, faintly luminous, the color of blood and rubies, clouded with the same confusion she felt drowning in. He blinked slowly, as though trying to focus his vision. "Are you all right?" he asked, though his own voice betrayed he was anything but. Eloan tried to answer, but the words tangled together before they could form. "I know. I don't think so." He ran a hand across his face, pressing his fingers to his temples. "This wine. There's something in this wine." "You drank it too?" Eloan asked, still gripping his arm to keep from collapsing. "Far more than I should have." He let out a humorless sound, somewhere between a laugh and a curse. "I don't drink. I never drink. And yet tonight." He didn't finish. They stood there, leaning on one another, two strangers caught in the same invisible current. The hall spun around them, voices warped. The music seemed to come from underwater. "You need water," he said suddenly, as if the thought had just broken through the fog. "We both do." "Water," Eloan repeated, the word feeling foreign.
"Yes."
And quiet. Somewhere away from. He looked around, his expression tightening with something close to panic.
"Come."
"I need to get you out of here. Get myself out of here."
He took her hand.
The touch was careful, almost hesitant, but his grip was steady. They began to move together, more stumbling than walking. Eloan leaned on him and he leaned on her, and if the situation hadn't been so desperately wrong, it might have been comical. "Where are we going?" she asked, tripping over her own feet. "Anywhere but this cursed hall," he muttered, steadying her when she nearly fell. They climbed stairs she didn't recognize, turned down corridors she'd never seen. More than once, they had to stop and simply breathe, waiting for the world to stop spinning. More than once, Eloan felt the absurd urge to laugh or sob. She couldn't tell which. When they finally reached a door, he pushed it open with his shoulder, the effort taking more strength than it should. The room beyond was large and sparsely furnished, lit only by moonlight streaming through tall, arched windows. There was a bed draped in dark fabric, and, thank the gods, a pitcher of water on a small table near the hearth. "Sit," he said, guiding her toward the bed with surprising gentleness. Eloan let herself sink onto the mattress, her head swimming. He moved to the table, lifting the pitcher with both hands. His fingers trembled so badly, he nearly dropped it. "Damn it," he whispered, gripping the handle tighter. He poured water into a silver cup and returned to her, kneeling with visible effort. When he finally steadied himself, he extended the cup toward her.
"Drink."
Slowly. Eloan took the cup, but her hand shook too. She brought it to her lips and drank, feeling the cool water slide down her throat. It was the first thing all night that felt real. "More," he said, taking the cup from her trembling fingers and refilling it. While he focused on not spilling, Eloan looked at him. Truly looked at him. Even through the haze, even with everything spinning, she could see how otherworldly he was. Beautiful in a way that felt dangerous, like staring too long at the edge of a blade. His features were too perfect, too cold. And yet there was something in his expression, something lost and lonely and achingly human. Without thinking, she reached out and touched his face. He froze. "You're beautiful," Eloan murmured, tracing her fingers along the sharp line of his jaw. His eyes widened. He swallowed hard, and she watched his throat work. "My lady," he said, his voice coming out strained. "Do not say things like that to me. Not here. Not now." But Eloan didn't stop. Her fingers slid upward, brushing through the silver strands of his hair. Why not? Because he drew a ragged breath, closing his eyes as if in pain. "I have drunk too much of whatever poison was in that wine. You have drunk too much. And if you keep looking at me like that, I will." He didn't finish. Eloan leaned forward and kissed him. The kiss was tentative at first, soft, uncertain. But when he didn't pull away, When she felt his lips move against hers with desperate, restrained hunger, something inside her shattered. He jerked back, breathing hard.
No.
We cannot. I cannot. But Aloan was already lost. Lost in the heat flooding her veins. Lost in the way he looked at her, as if she were something precious and forbidden all at once. She pulled him back and kissed him again.
Deeper this time.
Without hesitation. My lady, he tried to say between kisses, but his voice had no conviction left. Aloan let her lips trail from his mouth down along his jaw to the cool skin of his throat. She felt his entire body go rigid beneath her touch, felt his breathing quicken into something almost feral. We will regret this, he said, but his hands were already sliding up her waist, pulling her closer with a possessiveness that belied his words. Then let us regret it together, Aloan whispered against his skin. And that was all the permission he needed. He pulled her onto his lap, kissing her with an intensity that stole every remaining thought from her mind. Aloan clung to him, feeling the world spin for reasons that had nothing to do with enchanted wine. His hands were in her hair, at her waist, tracing the curve of her spine, and hers were everywhere, trying to memorize him, trying to carve every sensation into her bones before the night ended. The rest dissolved into fragments, touches that burned, whispers spoken in a language she didn't know, heat that felt both mortal and impossibly ancient. They fell together onto the bed, tangled and breathless, both lost in each other, both forgetting that whatever this was should never have been happening. When they finally collapsed, exhausted and entwined, the last thing Aloan remembered before sleep claimed her was the feeling of his fingers laced through hers, and the strange, aching certainty that she had just given away something she could never reclaim. Morning light pierced through the windows like a blade. Aloan opened her eyes slowly, her head throbbing with a pain so sharp it felt like punishment. It took several seconds for her to realize where she was. It took several more to realize she was alone. The bed beside her was cold. Her heart stopped. She sat up too quickly, the room tilting violently, and looked around with growing panic. Her gown lay in a crumpled heap on the floor. Her hair was loose and tangled, and on the pillow beside hers, there was nothing. No note, no token, no trace of the man who had whispered her name like a prayer in the dark. Aloan pressed a trembling hand to her chest, feeling her pulse race beneath her palm. She could still feel his touch, still taste him on her lips, but she could not remember his face. Only his eyes, glowing faintly red in the moonlight. Only his voice, low and broken and impossibly gentle. And the terrible, creeping realization that something inside her had changed. Something that could never be undone. The nausea came first. 3 weeks after the masquerade, Aloan woke to find her stomach churning with such violence, she barely made it to the wash basin. She retched until there was nothing left, then collapsed against the cool stone floor, trembling and confused. It happened again the next morning, and the next. By the 4th week, her gowns no longer fit properly. The seamstress had to let out the waist twice, her expression carefully neutral as she worked. Aloan told herself it was stress. Grief over a night she couldn't fully remember. Loss of something she couldn't name. But her body knew the truth before her mind would accept it. When her monthly courses failed to come for the 2nd time, Aloan finally sent for the healer. Mistress Korth arrived at dusk, her face lined with age and discretion. She examined Aloan in silence, her weathered hands gentle but thorough. When she finished, she sat back slowly and folded her hands in her lap. How far along? Aloan whispered, though she already knew. Near 2 months, my lady. Perhaps more. The room seemed to contract around her. Aloan pressed a hand to her abdomen, feeling nothing yet but knowing that everything had just irrevocably changed. You're sworn to silence, Aloan said, her voice barely audible. The healer's oath. I am sworn, Mistress Korth confirmed. and I will keep that oath. But oaths, Eloan would learn, were only as strong as the people who kept them. The whispers started within days. Eloan didn't know how the truth escaped, whether Mistress Korth had spoken to someone in confidence, or whether the servants had simply noticed and drawn their own conclusions. It didn't matter. By the end of the week, the entire household knew. Cassandra was the first to visit. She arrived in Eloan's chambers without knocking, her expression arranged into something that might have passed for concern if not for the cold satisfaction in her eyes. "Cousin," Cassandra said softly, closing the door behind her. "I've heard the most distressing rumor." Eloan sat frozen at her writing desk, a half-written letter abandoned before her. "I don't know what you've heard. That you're with child." Cassandra moved closer, her silk gown rustling. "That you've been keeping it a secret. That there is no father." "There is a father," Eloan said, her voice breaking. I can't. Can't remember?" Cassandra's smile was knife-sharp. "How convenient. It was the wine. At the masquerade. Something was in the wine. Yes, the ritual wine. The same wine we all drank." Cassandra tilted her head, false sympathy dripping from every word. "And yet only you woke up ruined." The word hung in the air like poison. Eloan stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. "Leave. Now." Cassandra didn't move. "The family will need to know, of course. For your own protection. And the household staff. Well, servants do talk. It would be cruel to let them speculate when the truth is so much simpler. Cassandra, please." But her cousin was already gone, her mission complete. By sunset, everyone knew. Lisette arrived the next morning, red-eyed and theatrical, clutching a handkerchief as if she'd been weeping for hours. "Oh, Eloan," she breathed, rushing forward to clasp Eloan's hands. "I cannot believe it. I simply cannot. After everything our family has done for you." "Lisette, I didn't. And to think no one knows who the father is." Lisette's voice carried, clearly intended for the maid standing just outside the door. "How you must be suffering. How ashamed you must feel." Eloan pulled her hands away. "I'm not ashamed. I didn't." "Of course you didn't mean for this to happen," Lisette said, her tone saccharine. "But people will talk, cousin. They already are. Some are even suggesting witchcraft. Or enchantment. Can you imagine?" She could, because Lisette had clearly been the one suggesting it. "You should rest," Lisette continued, dabbing at her dry eyes. "Conserve your strength. You'll need it for what's coming." She left in a swirl of perfume and false sympathy, and Eloan knew with cold certainty that every word of their conversation would be repeated, twisted, and spread throughout the noble houses by nightfall. The summons came 3 days later. Eloan was called before the family council, her uncle Lord Heron Ashford, her aunt Lady Morell, Cassandra, Lisette, and half a dozen other relatives whose names blurred together in her mounting panic. They sat in a semicircle in the great hall, their faces carved from stone and judgment. "Eloan Ashford," her uncle began, his voice devoid of warmth. "You stand accused of bringing dishonor to this house. You will answer our questions truthfully, or you will be cast out with nothing." Eloan's hands trembled at her sides. "I have brought no dishonor." "You are with child," Lady Morell interrupted coldly. "Unmarried, unbetrothed, and you refuse to name the father." "I cannot name him because I don't remember." "Cannot or will not?" Cassandra asked, her voice sharp. "Cannot." Eloan's voice cracked. "The wine at the masquerade, it was poisoned or enchanted or—" "The wine we all drank," Lord Heron said. "The wine that affected no one else this way. Someone tampered with mine. I'm certain of it." "Certainty without proof is hysteria," Lady Morell said dismissively. "Tell us the father's name, and we can salvage this." Eloan closed her eyes, searching desperately through fragmented memories. Silver hair, red eyes, a voice like shadow. but no name, no house, no identity she could offer them. "I don't know," she whispered. The silence that followed was damning. "Then you leave us no choice," Lord Heron said. "You will be removed from the main house. Your servants will be reassigned. Your allowance is suspended. You will take your meals alone and speak to no one outside this family until we determine what is to be done with you." "You're imprisoning me?" "We are protecting you," Lady Morell said, "and protecting this family's reputation from your recklessness." The isolation was immediate and absolute. Eloan was moved to a small chamber in the eastern wing, far from the main household. The servants who had once smiled at her now averted their eyes when she passed. Meals were brought by a single maid who refused to meet her gaze. No visitors were permitted. No letters sent or received. She was a ghost in her own home. The rumors, meanwhile, grew vicious. She heard them through closed doors and whispered in corridors. They said she had seduced a married lord, that she had lied with a commoner, that she had trafficked with dark magic and the child was cursed, that she had given herself to multiple men and simply refused to name them out of spite. Each version was worse than the last. Nobles who had once courted her family's favor now refused invitations. Marriage prospects evaporated. The Ashford name, once respected, became tainted by association. And through it all, Eloan felt the child growing inside her, innocent, unknown, already condemned. The final summons arrived on a frost-touched morning 6 weeks later. Eloan broke the seal with shaking hands and read the elegant script twice before the words made sense. "You are commanded to attend the royal gathering at the King's Hall on the evening of the winter moon. Your presence is required. Failure to attend will result in formal censure." It was signed by the royal steward, but Eloan knew exactly what this was. Not an invitation. A spectacle. They were going to parade her before the entire court, the fallen noblewoman, the disgrace, the cautionary tale. They would let the nobles see her condition, hear the rumors, and watch as she stood alone with no one to defend her. Eloan pressed a hand to her stomach, feeling the first flutter of movement beneath her palm. "I'm sorry," she whispered to the child who would be born into shame. "I'm so sorry." But the summons could not be refused. And so, on the evening of the winter moon, Eloan Ashford would walk into the King's Hall carrying a secret she couldn't name and a child no one would claim, and she would discover that sometimes salvation comes from the most impossible source. Sometimes it comes wrapped in darkness. Sometimes it wears a crown. King Valor Nightborn had not felt hunger in 3 centuries. Not true hunger, the kind that clawed at the mind and made even ancient discipline fracture. He had learned long ago to manage the bloodlust, to reduce it to a mere whisper at the back of his consciousness. Control was survival. Control was sovereignty. And yet, for the past 2 months, something had been wrong. He stood now in the highest tower of the night court, looking out over the valley where torchlight flickered in the human settlements below. Behind him, the council chamber still echoed with the voices of those who thought themselves his equals simply because they had survived as long as he had. "The houses grow restless, Your Majesty," Lady Seraphine had said, her tone edged with warning. "Without an heir, without a clear line of succession, they begin to question your permanence." "Let them question," Valor had replied. "Questions become whispers. Whispers become plots." Lord Theron had leaned forward, his ancient eyes glinting. "You have ruled for 800 years. That is 700 years longer than most vampire kings survive. They wonder if you are weakening." "I am not weakening." "Then prove it," Seraphine had pressed. "Take a consort. Produce an heir. Show them the Nightborn line continues." Valor had said nothing. What could he say? That he had no interest in the political marriages they proposed? That every potential bride they paraded before him felt wrong in ways he couldn't articulate? That the very thought of binding himself to someone for eternity made something in his chest constrict with revulsion? He had dismissed them. Again. But their words lingered like poison. The prophecy had surfaced 3 months ago, dragged from some forgotten crypt by an oracle too old to fear speaking truth to power. A child of 2 bloods shall rise when the moon bleeds red, born of shadow and flesh, of death and breath. This child shall either bind the realms in peace or drown them in eternal blood.
Cryptic.
Ominous. Impossible to ignore. The council believed it referred to a vampire-human union, something forbidden for good reason. Such children were rare, unstable, and historically catastrophic. Most died before birth. Those who survived often went mad. And yet the prophecy insisted one was coming. Valor had spent weeks searching his memory, cataloging every human he'd encountered, every moment of potential weakness. There was nothing. He was careful. Always careful. Except his hand tightened on the stone windowsill. Except for that night 2 months ago. The night he couldn't fully remember. He had attended the Harvest Masquerade as a courtesy, a political gesture to ease tensions between the vampire houses and human nobility. He remembered arriving. Remembered the oppressive heat of mortal bodies pressed together, the cloying sweetness of their ritual wine. He remembered drinking, something he never did. And then the memories became fragments. Silver fog, warmth against his skin, a voice, soft and broken, whispering his name though he'd given her no name to speak. The taste of blood on his lips, not from feeding, but from a bitten lip, a moment of passion that shouldn't have happened. He remembered waking alone in an unfamiliar chamber, his control shattered, his mind blank. And he remembered the aching certainty that he had lost something precious. For 2 months he had searched, discreetly questioned attendees, sent agents to investigate. But whoever she was, she had vanished as completely as his memory of her face. All he had left was the ghost of her touch and a hunger that refused to fade. The summons to the royal gathering had been politically necessary. The human nobles wanted reassurance that the night court remained stable. Valor's presence would provide that, or so his advisors claimed. He suspected it was another attempt to force him into proximity with potential brides. The king's hall was already crowded when Valor arrived, flanked by his personal guard. Conversations stuttered and died as he passed. Nobles bowed, some out of respect, most out of fear. He barely noticed. Something in the air felt wrong. Not dangerous. He would have sensed a threat immediately. This was different. Subtler. Like a scent carried on the wind that he couldn't quite place, but recognized on some primal level. Valor paused mid-step, his eyes scanning the hall. "Your Majesty?" Lord Kieran, his captain of the guard, asked quietly. "Do you smell that?" Valor murmured. "Smell what, sire?" Valor didn't answer. He moved deeper into the hall, following the pull of something he couldn't name. His senses sharpened. Every heartbeat in the room became distinct. Every breath. He stopped. There. Near the far wall, standing utterly alone in a sea of nobles who gave her wide berth as if she carried plague, was a woman. She was dark-haired, pale, visibly pregnant. Her gown was simple, almost austere, and she held herself with a dignity that contrasted sharply with the way everyone around her pretended she didn't exist. Valor's breath caught. He knew her, not her face. He still couldn't recall her face clearly through the haze of that night. But her presence, her scent, the way she stood as if bracing against an invisible storm, it was her, the woman from the masquerade, the woman he'd been searching for. And she was carrying a child. His mind raced, calculating dates, possibilities, impossibilities. 2 months since the masquerade. Her condition clearly advanced beyond that, which meant the child wasn't his. The realization should have brought relief. Instead, it brought something darker, something possessive and irrational that he had no right to feel. She stood alone, unprotected, surrounded by nobles whose expressions ranged from disgust to curiosity to cruel amusement. No family at her side. No house colors displayed. Nothing to shield her from what was clearly about to become a public humiliation. Valor's hands clenched at his sides. He didn't know why she was here. Didn't know what had brought her to this moment. But he knew, with the certainty of 8 centuries of survival, that he was watching someone about to be destroyed. And he knew, with equal certainty, that he was not going to let that happen. A lord near the dais called for attention, his voice booming across the hall. The crowd began to quiet, their eyes turning toward the woman who stood alone.
Toward Aloan.
Valor moved forward, his decision already made. Whatever came next would change everything. But perhaps, he thought as he approached her, everything was already broken beyond repair. Perhaps it was time to break it further and see what could be rebuilt from the ruins. Lord Davern Morshare's voice cut through the hall like a blade. Lady Aloan Ashford, he announced, his tone dripping with false formality. Step forward. Aloan's heart hammered against her ribs. Every eye in the hall turned toward her. She felt their judgment like physical weight, pressing down on her shoulders, stealing the air from her lungs. She moved forward on trembling legs, each step an exercise in sheer will. You stand before this court, Lord Davern continued, clearly relishing his role as inquisitor, bearing visible evidence of indiscretion. The noble houses have questions, questions that deserve answers. Aloan stopped at the center of the hall, utterly exposed. She could see Cassandra and Lisette near the edge of the crowd, their faces arranged in theatrical concern that barely masked their satisfaction. My lady, another lord called out, his voice sharp. You are with child, yet you wear no wedding band. You claim no husband. Surely you can enlighten us. Who is the father? The silence that followed was suffocating. Aloan opened her mouth, but no words came. What could she say? That she didn't remember? That the night was stolen from her by enchanted wine and fragmented memory? They would call her a liar. Or worse, mad. Answer the question, Lord Davern pressed, stepping closer. Who fathered your bastard? The word echoed through the hall.
Bastard.
Not a child. Not innocent life.
Bastard.
Aloan's hands moved instinctively to her stomach, protective. She cannot answer. Someone whispered loudly enough to carry. Because she does not know. Cruel laughter rippled through the crowd. Or because there were too many to count, another voice added. More laughter, louder this time. Aloan felt tears burn behind her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She would not give them that satisfaction. She would not. Perhaps she bewitched some poor fool. Cassandra's voice rang out, perfectly timed. Or perhaps she simply has no shame. Cousin, please, Lisette added, her handkerchief pressed to her mouth as if holding back sobs. This is too painful to witness. Lord Davern moved even closer, towering over Aloan. Name the father, girl. Or admit you cannot, and face the consequences of your disgrace. Aloan's vision blurred. The walls seemed to close in. This was it. The moment they had orchestrated. Her complete and final destruction, witnessed by every house that mattered. She opened her mouth to speak, to say something, anything. And then the air in the hall changed. A presence moved through the crowd like winter wind, cold and absolute. Nobles stepped back instinctively, their conversations dying mid-word. King Valor Nightborn emerged from the masses, his silver hair catching torchlight, his red eyes fixed on Aloan with an intensity that stole her breath. He moved with inhuman grace, each step deliberate, until he stood directly behind her. That, Valor said, his voice low and utterly commanding, is quite enough. Lord Davern paled. Your Majesty, we were merely tormenting a woman for your entertainment. Valor's hand settled on Aloan's shoulder, his touch firm, possessive, unmistakable in its meaning. How noble of you. Aloan's entire body went rigid. She could feel the coldness of his palm through the fabric of her gown, could sense the power radiating from him like heat from a forge. My lord, Cassandra called out, her voice strained. We only seek the truth. The truth, Valor interrupted, his gaze sweeping across the hall, is standing before you. He moved slightly, positioning himself beside Aloan so that everyone could see them together. His hand remained on her shoulder, a brand of ownership that no one could misinterpret. The child, Valor said, his voice carrying to every corner of the hall, is mine. The silence that crashed down was absolute. For 3 heartbeats, no one moved. No one breathed. Then the hall erupted. Gasps rippled through the crowd like shockwaves. Nobles turned to each other in disbelief. Whispers became shouts. The Lord Davrin actually stumbled backward, his face draining of color. Impossible, someone breathed. The Vampire King. A human consort. An heir. Aloan swayed, her knees threatening to buckle. Valor's grip tightened, holding her upright. She turned her head slightly, trying to look at him, trying to understand what was happening, but her vision swam. This couldn't be real. This couldn't be. Your Majesty, Lord Davrin managed, his voice strangled. Surely you don't mean? I mean exactly what I said. Valor's tone left no room for argument. Lady Aloan carries my child. She is under my protection. And anyone who questions her honor again will answer to me personally. The threat hung in the air, sharp as steel. Across the hall, Aloan saw Cassandra's face go white. Lisette's mouth opened and closed soundlessly, her carefully constructed narrative crumbling in real time. The scorn that had filled the room moments ago transformed instantly into forced reverence. Nobles who had been laughing now bowed. Those who had whispered insults now averted their eyes in respect, or fear. The dishonored woman had become untouchable. The bastard had become a royal heir. Aloan's legs finally gave out. Valor caught her before she fell, lifting her with impossible ease. He leaned close, his lips nearly brushing her ear, his voice dropping to a whisper only she could hear. Pretend that baby is mine, he murmured. Play along, and I will protect you. Resist, and I cannot help you. Do you understand? Aloan's mind spun. She didn't understand. She understood nothing. But she managed a single, trembling nod. Good. He straightened, addressing the hall once more. Lady Aloan will be escorted to the Night Court immediately. She will remain under my protection until the child is born, and beyond. He gestured, and vampire guards materialized from the shadows, forming a protective circle around them. This gathering, Valor announced coldly, is concluded. The journey to the Night Court passed in a blur. Aloan sat in the carriage beside the Vampire King, her hands folded in her lap, her mind struggling to process what had just happened. Vampire guards rode alongside them, silent and lethal. Valor said nothing. He simply watched her with those unsettling red eyes, his expression unreadable. Finally, as the dark spires of the Night Court came into view against the starlit sky, Aloan found her voice. Why? She whispered. Valor was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was carefully neutral. Because you needed saving, and I needed a solution to a political problem. He turned his gaze to the window. This arrangement benefits us both. Nothing more. The words should have brought relief. Instead, they settled in her chest like stones. As the carriage passed through the gates into the realm of vampires and shadow, Aloan realized she had traded one prison for another. But this prison came with a crown. And this lie, this impossible, world-shattering lie, was now the only thing keeping her alive. Can you believe what just happened? The Vampire King just claimed Aloan's child as his own in front of the entire court. But here's the thing, my beautiful story family, this is just the beginning. The lie has been spoken. But the truth? The truth is so much more complicated, so much more heartbreaking than anyone realizes. If you're as invested in Aloan and Valor's story as I am, do me a favor right now. Smash that like button so I know you're with me on this journey. And if you haven't subscribed yet, what are you waiting for? Tomorrow's story is going to blow your mind just like this one. Drop a comment and tell me, do you think Valor is making a terrible mistake, or is this the beginning of something beautiful? Because what happens next in Chapter 5 is going to test everything you think you know about love, lies, and loyalty. Let's continue. The chambers Valor assigned her were more beautiful than any prison had a right to be. Eloan stood in the center of the room, turning slowly to take it all in. Walls of dark stone softened by tapestries depicting moonlit forests. A bed draped in midnight silk. Windows that overlooked gardens where silver flowers bloomed under starlight. It was luxury beyond anything she'd known in her own family's estate. It was also a cage. Valor stood near the doorway, his posture rigid, his hands clasped behind his back. He had been silent since they'd arrived, his expression carefully blank. "I need you to understand the situation clearly," he said finally, his voice devoid of warmth. "The Vampire Council has been demanding I produce an heir. They believe it will stabilize the realm, prevent rebellion. I have been resistant." "Why?" Eloan asked quietly. "Because binding myself to someone for eternity holds no appeal." He moved to the window, looking out at his domain. But the prophecy changed things. A child of two bloods. The council believes such a child could either unite the realms or destroy them. They've become obsessed with ensuring the former. Eloan's hand moved to her stomach. "And my child provides a convenient solution. If I claim your child as mine, it satisfies their demands without requiring me to actually." He trailed off, something almost like distaste crossing his features. "You gain protection, status, safety for yourself, and the baby. I gain political leverage and time." Time for what? To find another solution. To break this arrangement once it's served its purpose. He turned to face her, his red eyes meeting hers. "This is not a love match, Lady Eloan. This is survival. For both of us." The words were brutal in their honesty. Eloan should have been grateful for the clarity. Instead, she felt something crack inside her chest. "I understand," she said. "There will be rules. You will be treated as my consort in public. You will attend court functions when required. You will not contradict the story we've established." His gaze softened slightly. "In private, you are free to live as you wish within these walls. I will not touch you. I will not demand anything of you beyond the performance we must maintain." Eloan nodded slowly. "And after the child is born, we will reassess." His voice was carefully neutral. "But you will always have my protection, regardless of what comes next." It was more than anyone else had offered her. More than she'd dared hope for when she'd walked into that hall expecting complete destruction. She should have been grateful.
She was.
She was terrified and grateful and trapped all at once. "Thank you," Eloan whispered. Something flickered in Valor's expression. Surprise, perhaps, or discomfort. "Don't thank me. This is a transaction. Nothing more." He left before she could respond, the door closing behind him with a finality that echoed through the empty chamber. The weeks that followed established a strange, careful rhythm. Eloan was given servants who bowed when they saw her. She was dressed in gowns of deep crimson and midnight blue, colors that marked her as belonging to the Nightborn house. She was escorted everywhere by guards who would die before letting harm reach her. She was treated like a queen. She felt like a ghost. Court whispers reached her despite the protection. Vampires who had lived centuries spoke in hushed tones about hybrid children, the instability, the danger, the historical failures. Some looked at her with curiosity, others with barely concealed disgust. Valor silenced them all with ruthless efficiency. When a lesser lord made the mistake of questioning Eloan's legitimacy within her hearing, Valor appeared from nowhere and pinned the vampire against a wall with one hand. "Question her again," Valor said, his voice deadly soft, "and you will learn exactly how much mercy I'm willing to extend." The Lord fled the moment Valor released him. Eloan watched it happen from across the courtyard, her heart racing. She didn't know whether to be terrified or something else. It kept happening. Valor defended her with lethal precision, forbidding others from speaking her name with anything less than respect, making it clear that harming her would be the last mistake anyone made. It should have felt like a strategy. It felt like something more. Late at night, when the castle fell silent, Eloan would wake to the sensation of being watched. She never saw him, never heard him enter, but she knew he was there, standing in the shadows of her chamber, listening. Sometimes she would press a hand to her stomach and feel the baby move, and she would swear she heard his breath catch in the darkness. He never spoke, never came closer, but he was always there. One night, she broke the silence. "Why do you come here?" A long pause. Then, from the shadows near the window, "I don't know." His voice was rough, almost confused, vulnerable in a way she'd never heard before. "You could just ask," Eloan said softly. "If you want to know the baby as well." "I have no right to ask. You claimed this child as yours before the entire court. That gives you every right." Silence. Then the sound of movement. He emerged from the shadows, his silver hair catching moonlight, his expression unreadable. "Does it hurt?" he asked quietly. "The pregnancy?" "Sometimes. Mostly it's just strange. Feeling another life inside me." He moved closer, stopping at the edge of the bed. "May I?" Eloan's breath caught. She nodded. Valor knelt beside the bed and, with a hesitance that seemed impossible for someone so ancient and powerful, placed his palm against her stomach. The baby moved beneath his touch. Valor's eyes widened. "I can feel her heartbeat," Eloan whispered. "The healer says it's a girl." "A daughter." The words came out rough, almost odd. He stayed there for a long moment, his hand steady, his expression stripped of all the careful control he usually wore. Then he withdrew abruptly, standing and stepping back. "I should not have." "You can come whenever you want," Eloan said. "You don't have to hide in the shadows." Something in his expression cracked. "I'm not hiding." "Then what are you doing?" He looked at her for a long moment, and Eloan saw something ancient and lonely in his eyes, something that made her chest ache. "Trying," he said finally, "not to want things I cannot have." He left before she could ask what he meant. Eloan lay awake long after he'd gone, her hand resting where his had been. She was falling in love with him. It was foolish and dangerous and completely inevitable. She saw the way he moved through the world, lonely despite his power. She saw the careful way he never touched her without permission, the way he whispered apologies to her belly when he thought she was sleeping. She saw the man beneath the crown, and she knew, with painful clarity, that she was temporary, a solution to a political problem, a placeholder until he found something better. When this arrangement ended, when the baby was born and the prophecy assessed and the council satisfied, he would let her go. He would move on, and she would be left loving a king who had only ever pretended she mattered. The realization settled over her like frost, cold and inescapable. But even knowing the truth, even understanding she was destined for heartbreak, Eloan couldn't stop her traitorous heart from hoping that maybe, just maybe, pretending could become real. Eloan found the letters by accident. She had been searching for a book in Valor's private study. He'd given her permission to use his library freely when a drawer slid open, revealing correspondence bound with black ribbon. She shouldn't have looked, but the top letter bore a date from 2 weeks ago, and the handwriting was Valor's own elegant script. "Continue searching. Someone at the masquerade must remember her. Silver fog or not, she existed. She was real." Eloan's hands trembled as she read further. "I need her name, her house, anything. The memory haunts me, and I will not, rest until I find her." The words blurred. Eloan set the letter down carefully, her heart fracturing. He was searching for someone, a woman from his past, a woman he couldn't forget, a woman who wasn't her. The realization poisoned everything that followed. Eloan began noticing the signs she'd been too hopeful to see before. The way Valor sometimes stared into the distance during their meals, his expression distant and yearning. The nights he disappeared for hours, returning with frustration etched into every line of his face. Once, she overheard him speaking with Lord Kieran in the corridor outside her chambers. Any progress? Valor's voice was tense. None, sire. No one remembers seeing you with any particular woman that night. The enchantment in the wine affected too many memories. Then search harder. Question everyone who attended. Offer gold, titles, whatever it takes. A pause, then quieter. I have to find her. The desperation in his voice was a knife to Eloan's chest. She pressed her hand to the door, steadying herself, understanding with brutal clarity what she had been too naive to see before. Valor had claimed her child to solve a political problem. He protected her because it served his purposes. But his heart belonged to someone else, someone he'd lost and couldn't stop searching for. She was a placeholder, a convenience, nothing more. The emotional distance grew like frost between them, despite the physical closeness their arrangement demanded. They still attended court functions together, still played the devoted consort and protective king. But in private, Eloan withdrew into herself, and Valor seemed too preoccupied with his search to notice. Or perhaps he simply didn't care. When he came to her chambers at night now, she pretended to be asleep. She couldn't bear to see that longing in his eyes and know it was meant for someone else. The baby kicked harder as if sensing her mother's distress. Eloan whispered apologies into the darkness, promising her daughter that somehow they would survive this. They had survived worse, after all. Beyond the night court's walls, Cassandra and Lisette had not been idle. Word reached Eloan through her maid, who had proven surprisingly loyal despite being assigned by the vampire court, that her cousins had been gathering information, questioning healers, consulting with scholars who specialized in vampire lore. They're searching for proof, the maid whispered while brushing Eloan's hair. Proof that the child isn't His Majesty's. They won't find it, Eloan said, though her voice lacked conviction. They're also spreading new rumors, my lady, saying you bewitched the king, that you used dark magic to ensnare him. Eloan closed her eyes. Of course they were. The rumors spread like plague through both vampire and human courts. Some dismissed them. Others listened with dangerous interest. The Vampire Council, already suspicious of a human consort, began questioning Valor's judgment more openly. She heard them one evening when she passed too close to the council chamber. The king is compromised, a voice said coldly. He defends her with irrational intensity. He threatens ancient lords over perceived slights. This is not political strategy, this is obsession. Perhaps the rumors are true, another suggested. Perhaps she has enthralled him somehow. Then we must act before he destroys everything our kind has built. Eloan fled before she could hear more. That night, she made a decision. She would leave. Not immediately. She was too far along in her pregnancy to travel safely. But after the baby was born, once Eloan had recovered enough to ride, she would take her daughter and disappear. It was the only way to protect Valor from the damage she was causing simply by existing in his life. The only way to free him to find the woman he actually wanted. The thought of leaving made her chest ache with a pain that felt physical. But love, she had learned, sometimes meant letting go. Even when letting go would destroy you. She didn't know Valor had sensed her withdrawal until he confronted her 3 days later. He found her in the garden at dusk, standing beneath the silver-leafed trees, one hand resting on her swollen belly. You're planning to leave. It wasn't a question. Eloan turned slowly, finding him standing several paces away, his expression unreadable. After the baby is born, she admitted quietly. When it's safe.
Why?
Because I'm putting you in danger. The council suspects me of witchcraft. The rumors are damaging your authority. And you, her voice cracked. You have more important things to focus on than protecting someone you don't even know what? He moved closer, his eyes intense. Someone you don't even want. The words came out as a whisper. Valor stared at her as if she'd struck him. You think I don't want you here? I think you're searching for someone else. I think I'm just the solution that presented itself when you needed one. And I think, Eloan's voice broke completely. I think when you find her, whoever she is, you'll finally be free of this burden. Eloan. You don't have to explain. I understand. I've always understood. She turned away, unable to look at him anymore. Behind her, she heard him draw a sharp breath, as if to speak. But before he could, a sound split the evening air. The clash of steel. A shout of alarm. Valor spun toward the noise, his entire body going rigid. Get behind me.
Now.
Eloan obeyed instinctively, her heart racing. Figures emerged from the tree line, armed men moving with deadly purpose. Not vampire guards. Not night court soldiers. Assassins. One of them locked eyes on Eloan, his blade already drawn. And Valor, with a sound that was more animal than man, placed himself directly between her and the threat. The last thing Eloan saw before chaos erupted was the way he looked at her, not like a political convenience, not like a temporary arrangement. Like something precious he would die before losing. Then the killing began. Valor moved like death incarnate. The first assassin died before his blade completed its arc. The second managed to scream before Valor tore out his throat. The third got through. It happened too fast for Eloan to process. One moment Valor was a blur of lethal grace, cutting down threats with inhuman speed. The next, an assassin broke through his defense, blade aimed directly at the vampire king's exposed back. Eloan didn't think. She threw herself forward, her pregnant body moving on pure instinct. She collided with Valor's back just as the blade descended. Pain exploded across her shoulder. She gasped, stumbling, feeling warmth spread down her arm. Valor spun, catching her before she fell, his eyes wide with horror.
No.
No, no, no. His hand pressed against her wound, trying to stem the bleeding. Eloan, why would you? You are going to die, she whispered, her vision swimming. The remaining assassins closed in. Valor's guards finally arrived, engaging them in brutal combat. But Valor's attention was entirely on Eloan, on the blood seeping between his fingers, on the way her face had gone pale. Stay with me, he commanded, his voice breaking. Stay with me. Eloan tried to answer, but darkness crept at the edges of her vision. She was distantly aware of being lifted, of movement, of Valor's voice shouting orders she couldn't comprehend. Then she felt his lips against her shoulder, felt him trying to seal the wound the way vampires could, by taking the damaged blood, by using his own healing properties to close the injury. The moment her blood touched his tongue, everything changed. Valor froze. The taste of her blood hit him like lightning, like drowning, like waking from a centuries-long sleep. It wasn't just the flavor, sweet and warm and achingly mortal. It was the recognition that came with it. Memory crashed through him with devastating clarity. The masquerade. The ritual wine laced with something that had stolen his control. The way he'd stumbled through corridors, disoriented and desperate for air. Colliding with a woman in the darkness. Brown hair. Frightened eyes. A voice that trembled when she spoke. You're so beautiful, she whispered, touching his face with wonder. Don't say things like that to me here, he had responded, knowing he was losing the battle with his own desire. Why not? Because I've had too much to drink. You've had too much to drink. And if you keep looking at me like that, I will. She had kissed him, and he had been lost. He remembered the way she felt in his arms, soft and warm and desperately willing. Remembered the taste of her lips, the sound of her breathless moans, the way she had clung to him as if he were salvation itself. He remembered whispering promises he had no right to make. He remembered the moment of completion, the way something ancient and primal inside him had recognized her as his. He remembered waking alone, the memory already fragmenting, leaving him with nothing but the ghost of her presence and a longing that had haunted him ever since. The woman he'd been searching for. The woman he'd claimed to find. She had been right in front of him all along. Eloan, he breathed, his voice wrecked. The child she carried wasn't a convenient lie. It was his.
His.
Born of that stolen night. Born of enchantment and passion and a connection neither of them had been meant to forget, but had anyway. The baby. Vaylor's hands shook as he held her. Gods, Eloan, the baby is. But she wasn't conscious of hearing him. Her head lolled against his shoulder, her breathing shallow. Terror unlike anything he'd felt in 800 years seized him. Get the healers, he roared.
Now.
They took her to his private chambers, the rooms he never let anyone enter. The healers worked frantically while Vaylor stood frozen, his hands still stained with her blood, his mind reeling from revelation. He had to tell her. I had to explain. Had to. Your Majesty. Lord Kieran's voice was grim. Vaylor turned, some part of him already knowing the news would be catastrophic. The assassins were a distraction. There was a second team. Kieran's jaw tightened. They took advantage of the chaos. Lady Cassandra and Lady Lisette infiltrated the castle with outside help. What are you saying? They were after Lady Eloan, sire. They had orders to take her alive if possible. 2. Kieran's voice dropped. To remove the child before it could be born. To destroy the evidence of your claimed heir. Vaylor's vision went red. Where are they now? They fled during the attack. Our scouts tracked them to the border, but Kieran hesitated. They had help. Vampire hunters. Well-armed, well-funded. This was coordinated, Your Majesty. Vaylor's hands clenched into fists. And Cassandra and Lisette? Disappeared, likely meeting their collaborators to regroup. Find them. Vaylor's voice was barely recognizable. Find them and bring them to me. Alive if possible. Dead if necessary. But find them. Kieran bowed and vanished. Vaylor returned to Eloan's side. The healers had stabilized her, sealed the wound, assured him both she and the baby would survive. But she remained unconscious, her face too pale, her breathing too shallow. He knelt beside the bed, taking her hand carefully. I know, he whispered. I remember everything, Eloan. The masquerade.
The wine.
The way you looked at me in the moonlight. The way you felt in my arms. His voice cracked. The child is mine.
Ours.
And I was too blind to see it. She didn't respond. Didn't hear him. And before he could tell her again, before he could make her understand that she wasn't a convenience or a placeholder, that she was the woman he'd been desperately searching for all along. A scream echoed from the outer corridor. Vaylor was on his feet instantly, but he was too late. When he burst into the hallway, his guards lay dead or dying. And the window at the end of the corridor stood open, curtains billowing in the night wind. Eloan was gone. Vaylor stood in the empty corridor, his mind fracturing. They had taken her while she was wounded and pregnant and unconscious. Take his mate, his child. The silence that followed was absolute, the kind of silence that comes before apocalypse. Then Vaylor Nightborn, king of the Night Court, ancient and immortal and bound by 8 centuries of careful control, unleashed a sound that shattered windows and sent every creature within a mile fleeing in terror. It was rage. It was anguish. It was a promise of violence, so absolute that the realm itself seemed to tremble. They had taken her, and he would burn the world to ash to get her back. Oh my God. They took her. Vaylor just discovered the truth, that Eloan is the woman he's been searching for all along, that the baby is his, and now she's been kidnapped while pregnant and wounded. My beautiful story, family, I need you to stay with me because what's about to happen in Chapter 8 is going to be absolutely brutal. If your heart is racing right now, if you're feeling that same rage and desperation that Valor is feeling, show me by hitting that like button. Let me know in the comments if you're Team Valor, because this vampire king is about to unleash hell itself to get his mate and child back. And listen, if you're not subscribed yet, subscribe right now, because tomorrow I have another story lined up that's going to grab you by the heart just like this one has. Trust me, you don't want to miss what happens next. The Night Court is going to war. Eloan woke to the smell of iron and earth. Her shoulders screamed with pain. Her wrists burned where rough rope cut into skin. And beneath it all, a deeper, more terrifying pain, low in her abdomen, tightening like a fist.
No.
Not yet. It was too soon. She's awake. Cassandra's voice. Cold, triumphant. Eloan forced her eyes open. She was in some kind of underground chamber, lit by torches that cast dancing shadows on stone walls. Her cousin stood near the entrance, flanked by armed men whose faces were hidden behind hunters' masks. Where? Eloan's voice came out hoarse. Where am I? Somewhere the vampire king will never find you in time. Lisette moved closer, her false sympathy finally abandoned. Did you really think you could steal a throne with your lies? That we would simply accept your sudden elevation? Another contraction seized Eloan, stealing her breath. She doubled over as much as the ropes allowed, gasping. Oh dear, Cassandra said without a trace of concern. Is the bastard coming early? How inconvenient. She's in labor, one of the hunters observed. We should move quickly. No. Eloan's voice was desperate.
Please.
The baby. The baby is evidence, Cassandra interrupted coldly. Evidence that you lied. Evidence that the king was deceived. Once it's born, we'll prove it's not his. And then, she smiled, then your entire house of cards collapses. And if the child dies? Lisette asked almost conversationally. Cassandra shrugged. Even better. No half-breed abomination, no political complication. The king will be humiliated, and we will be vindicated. Eloan's vision blurred with tears and pain. Another contraction, stronger this time. The baby was coming whether she was ready or not. She was going to give birth in chains. She was going to die here, believing Valor had never wanted her. That she had been nothing but a convenient lie. Please, she whispered to her daughter through the pain. Please forgive me. Miles away, Valor stood in the ruins of his council chamber. The table had been shattered. The walls bore claw marks. 3 council members lay unconscious after trying to counsel patience. Strategy, caution. Valor was far beyond caution. Track them, he commanded Lord Kieran, his voice inhuman. Use every resource. Call in every debt. I want scouts in every direction. Spies in every settlement.
Find
her.
Now.
Your Majesty, we're all ready. Valor's hand shot out, gripping Kieran's throat. Not hard enough to damage, but hard enough to convey absolute desperation. She is in labor by now. Do you understand? They took her wounded and pregnant, and she is in labor. Every second we waste is a second she suffers. He released Kieran, who stumbled back, eyes wide. Mobilize the entire night court, Valor continued, his voice dropping to something deadly quiet. Every vampire, every thrall, every creature that owes me allegiance. I want an army. An army, sire? I'm going to war. Valor's eyes blazed crimson. And I'm going to kill everyone who stands between me and her. They found the location within an hour. An abandoned hunter's stronghold 15 miles south, hidden in caves designed specifically to hide from vampire senses. But Valor was beyond sense now. He was pure instinct, following a connection he'd been too blind to recognize before. He could feel her pain, her terror, her fading strength. The night court descended like a plague. Valor led the charge, moving faster than mortal eyes could track. The hunters died before they could raise their weapons. Those who managed to fight lasted seconds at most. It wasn't a battle. It was annihilation. Valor tore through stone and steel and flesh, his ancient powers. Powers he'd kept buried for centuries. Powers that were too dangerous, too destructive, unleashed without restraint. He was no longer a king. He was a vengeance incarnate. He found Cassandra trying to flee through a side tunnel. She saw him coming and froze, all her cruel confidence evaporating. "Your Majesty, I can explain." Valor's hand closed around her throat, lifting her off the ground. "You took my mate. You endangered my child. Explain that." Cassandra choked, clawing at his grip. She lied to you. The baby isn't. The baby is mine." Each word was a death sentence. "The woman is mine. And you." He threw her against the wall hard enough to crack stone. "You are nothing." Lisette they found weeping in a corner, begging for mercy she had never shown Aloan. Valor left them both for his guards to handle. He had more important concerns. He could hear Aloan's heartbeat now, rapid, weakening, accompanied by a smaller, faster rhythm. The baby. He ran. He found her in the deepest chamber, collapsed against the wall, her hands still bound, her face streaked with tears and blood and sweat. And in her arms, wrapped in her torn gown, was a tiny, impossibly fragile infant. Aloan. Her name came out broken. She looked up, her eyes unfocused. Valor. He was at her side instantly, cutting her bonds with claws he didn't remember extending. "I'm here. I'm here. You're safe now." The baby, her voice was barely a whisper. "Is she? She's breathing. She's alive." Valor's hands shook as he reached for the child, this impossible, perfect creature he'd helped create without knowing. "You saved her." "I couldn't save us both," Aloan murmured, her eyes drifting closed. Tell her she was loved."
No.
Valor gathered them both carefully, his voice fierce. "You're not dying. I won't allow it. Do you hear me, Aloan? I won't allow it. You were looking for someone else. I was looking for you." The words burst from him desperately. "The masquerade, the lost memory, it was always you, Aloan. You were the woman I couldn't forget. You were our everything." Her eyes opened slightly, confused. "What?" "When I tasted your blood, I remembered. All of it. That night, the wine, the way we..." His voice cracked. "The child isn't a lie, Aloan. She's ours. She was always ours. And I was too blind to see that I'd already found what I was searching for." A tear slid down her cheek. "You remember? Everything. And I am so sorry I didn't remember sooner." Valor, her voice was fading. I can't. "Stay with me," he commanded, rising with her in his arms. "Healers."
Now.
His guards rushed forward, surrounding them. Valor moved through the carnage he'd created, through the bodies of those who dared touch what was his, carrying his mate and child toward safety, toward home. Aloan's heartbeat stuttered. The baby began to cry, a sound so pure and strong it shattered something in Valor's chest. "Live," he whispered against Aloan's hair. "Please. I just found you. Don't leave me now." Behind them, the hunter's stronghold burned. Before them, the night court awaited. And between them, a newborn daughter wailed, the child of prophecy, born in blood and shadow. Born of a love that had survived enchantment, separation, and lies. A love that would either save the realm or destroy it. But first it had to survive the night. Aloan woke to the sound of breathing. Not her own, though she could feel her chest rising and falling with effort. Not the healers who had surely been tending to her. This breathing was smaller, faster, a delicate rhythm that seemed to anchor her to consciousness. She opened her eyes slowly. Sunlight, actual sunlight, streamed through tall windows. She was in Valor's private chambers, she realized. In his bed, and beside her, nestled in a cradle of carved dark wood inlaid with silver, was her daughter. Their daughter. Eloan's breath caught. The baby was asleep, her tiny face peaceful, her silver-white hair catching the light. She was impossibly small, impossibly perfect. And she was alive. They were both alive. You're awake. Eloan turned her head, too quickly, sending a spike of pain through her shoulder. Valor sat in a chair beside the bed, looking as though he hadn't moved in days. His hair was disheveled, his formal coat discarded. He looked exhausted and relieved, and something else she couldn't name. Vulnerable. How long? Eloan's voice came out hoarse. 3 days. The healers said you lost too much blood. That the birth was, his voice caught. That we nearly lost you both. Eloan looked back at her daughter. But we survived. You survived. Valor stood slowly, moving to kneel beside the bed. Not towering over her, not standing with royal authority. Kneeling, as if she were the one who held power here. Valor. Let me speak, he interrupted gently. Please. Before I lose my courage. She nodded, her heart hammering. Valor took her hand carefully, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. I told you before you lost consciousness that I remembered. But I need you to understand the whole truth. He drew a shaky breath. The night of the masquerade, someone laced the ritual wine with something stronger than tradition allowed. We were both drugged, both stripped of our control and memory. When I found you in that corridor, when we helped each other escape that hall, his voice dropped. I didn't know who you were, but some part of me recognized you anyway. Recognized that you were important, that you were mine. Eloan's eyes burned with tears. We spent that night together, not as strangers taking advantage of enchantment, but as two people who found something real in the midst of chaos. I remember the way you looked at me, the way you touched me as if I were something precious instead of something to fear. I remember, his voice broke. I remember feeling less alone than I'd felt in centuries. A tear slid down Eloan's cheek. When I woke up alone the next morning, the memory was already fragmenting. By the time I returned to the night court, I could barely recall your face. But I remembered how you made me feel. And I've been searching for you ever since. Searching for the woman who made me believe, for one stolen night, that I could be more than just a king. Valor. You were standing right in front of me, he continued, his grip tightening on her hand. Carrying our child. Suffering because of a night we couldn't remember. And I was too blind to see it. Too consumed with searching for a ghost to realize she'd already found me. He lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. I don't want to pretend anymore, Eloan. I don't want this to be an arrangement or a convenience or a political solution. I want. He met her eyes, and she saw centuries of loneliness crack open. I want you. As my mate. My queen. My partner in all things. Not because of prophecy or politics, but because you're the woman I've been searching for. The woman I chose that night, even through enchantment. The woman I choose now, with full knowledge and no lies between us. Eloan's tears fell freely now. I thought you were searching for someone else. I thought I was just. You were never just anything. Valor's voice was fierce. You were everything. You are everything. And if you'll have me, not as the vampire king, but as the man who fell in love with you twice without knowing it, I will spend eternity proving that. Eloan couldn't speak. She pulled him forward instead, pressing her forehead to his, feeling his cool breath mingle with hers. Yes, she whispered. Yes, Valor. I choose you too. He kissed her then, softly, reverently, as if she were something holy. When they broke apart, he was smiling, and it transformed his entire face. Then there's something we need to do. The coronation was held 7 days later, when Aloan was strong enough to stand. The hall was filled, not just with vampires, but with human nobles who had come to witness history. The vampire council sat in the place of honor, their faces carefully neutral. Valor stood before the assembled court, his daughter, their daughter, cradled in his arms. She had been named Seraphiel, meaning burning light. The prophecy incarnate. "I called you here," Valor announced, his voice carrying through the hall, "to correct a deception." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. "When I claimed Lady Aloan's child as mine, many believed it was political strategy, a convenient solution to pressure from the council." He looked directly at the council members. "You are right to be suspicious, but you are wrong about the deception." He turned, extending his hand to Aloan. She stepped forward, her gown of crimson and silver marking her as Nightborn, her head held high despite the eyes boring into her. "The deception," Valor continued, "was not that this child was mine. The deception was that I claimed her for politics when the truth was always simpler." He looked at Aloan, his expression open and true. "She is mine because I am hers. The child is ours, born of a night we couldn't remember, but our souls never forgot. I didn't claim Aloan to solve a problem. I claimed her because even through enchantment and lost memory, even through separation and lies, I recognized my mate." Silence descended, absolute and shocked. Valor knelt, offering Aloan the crown that had been prepared, delicate silver inlaid with moonstone and ruby. "Aloan Ashford," he said clearly, "I claim you not as a convenience, but as a choice. Not as shield, but as equal. Not as consort, but as queen of the night court. If you will have me." Aloan looked down at him, this ancient, powerful king kneeling before her, and felt every remaining piece of shame and doubt fall away. She had been called ruined,
Dishonored.
rejected, but she had never been any of those things. She had been hidden, waiting for the moment when pretending could become truth. "I accept," she said, her voice steady and strong. Valor placed the crown on her head, then rose and kissed her before the entire court. When they broke apart, the hall erupted, not in scandal, but in recognition of something that could no longer be denied. The prophecy had been fulfilled. The child of two bloods had arrived, and the realm, balanced on the knife's edge between war and peace, chose peace, bound together by a love that had survived everything designed to destroy it. That night, in their private chambers, Valor sat with his family for the first time with no lies between them. Aloan held Seraphiel, humming softly while the baby slept. Valor sat beside them, his arm around Aloan's shoulders, his other hand resting gently on his daughter's tiny chest. "What do you think the prophecy meant?" Aloan asked quietly. "Will she save the realm or destroy it?" Valor was quiet for a long moment. Then he smiled, a real smile, without shadows. "I think," he said, "she'll do both. Destroy the old ways that kept us divided. Save us by forcing us to become something new." Aloan leaned her head against his shoulder. "And us. We," Valor said, pressing a kiss to her hair, "will teach her that the strongest bonds are the ones we choose. That love is worth fighting for. That sometimes the best things come from nights we can't remember and lies that become truth." Seraphiel stirred in her sleep, her tiny hand grasping her mother's finger. And in that moment, with silver moonlight streaming through the windows, with a family born of shadow and desperation and impossible love, Aloan Nightborn finally understood. She had never needed anyone else to claim her worth. She had always been enough. But choosing to be claimed, choosing to claim in return, had given her everything she never knew she needed.
A crown.
A family, a kingdom, and a love that would echo through eternity. And there we have it, my wonderful family. From a disgraced noblewoman standing alone in a hall of judgment to a crowned queen standing beside her mate with their prophecy child in her arms, Eloan's journey was never about being saved. It was about being seen. It was about choosing love even when love seemed impossible. I hope this story touched your heart the way it touched mine. If you enjoyed this journey, please hit that like button and let me know in the comments what your favorite moment was. Was it when Valor first whispered, "Pretend that baby is mine"? Was it the moment he remembered everything? Or was it that final coronation scene where the lie became the truth? Tell me everything. I read every single comment. And if you haven't subscribed yet, what are you doing? Click that subscribe button right now because tomorrow I'm bringing you another incredible story that you absolutely cannot miss. Thank you for being here with me, for investing your time and your hearts into Eloan and Valor's story. Until tomorrow, my beautiful story family, keep believing in love, keep believing in second chances, and keep believing that sometimes the most powerful truths begin as lies. I'll see you in the next one.